My freshman year at Westlake University started off pretty well. It's a mid-sized school, not huge, but big enough that you don't constantly bump into the same people. I was only 17 and fresh out of a relationship, so naturally I downloaded Hinge to explore what college dating had to offer. I matched with this guy named Ethan, who seemed decent enough. He was definitely awkward socially, but I've always had my own anxiety issues, so I felt sympathetic rather than put off. Looking back, that sympathy blinded me to all the warning signs I should have heeded. We texted for a while, and he came across as attentive and caring. Too attentive, really. He wanted to know everything about me. I hesitated to share too much, but I gave him the basics. Since we both lived on campus, he eventually invited me to hang out at his dorm. When we finally met face to face, things started feeling uncomfortable. We sat on his couch, almost cuddling but not quite, and as we talked, his comments began setting off alarm bells in my head. Things like, "I've never cuddled with anyone before, sorry if I'm doing it wrong," and repeated mentions of how much he liked me and wanted me to stay forever. Strange choice of words, but I tried to convince myself he was just being nice. I made up an excuse to leave pretty quickly and went back to my room. That night, the text started pouring in, declarations about how into me he was. I politely explained that I wasn't looking for anything serious, which was partly true, but mostly just my non-confrontational way of letting him down easy. That's when things got really weird. He sent this long, unsettling paragraph about how it was fine if I didn't want a relationship now, but he'd wait for me and save his virginity for me. We had never discussed anything remotely like that, and I hadn't even flirted with him. I just never explicitly rejected him until now. It was one of the creepiest messages I'd ever received, and it was only the beginning. He wouldn't leave me alone despite my attempts to de-escalate. Somehow, he started appearing everywhere on campus. He'd be there when my classes ended or show up at the dining hall exactly when I was eating. Even though my schedule hadn't changed, I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Finally, I turned him down completely. His response? Guilt-tripping, telling me he was going to hurt himself and that no one would ever love him. Having been in manipulative relationships before, I recognized this behavior immediately and shut it down. I told him I couldn't be friends with him anymore, and that was that. At least, that's what I thought. He didn't reply for a while, but when he did, everything spiraled into chaos. Thankfully, I was out of town at a concert that weekend, which gave me some sense of security. He unleashed a barrage of texts, paragraph after paragraph, calling me horrible names and saying I needed to be put in my place. I ignored it all. Then came the regret phase. He apologized profusely, claiming he couldn't bear being alone and that I was his only friend. He professed his love again, but I still didn't respond. To prove his dedication, he did something that chilled me to the bone. First, he told me he was standing outside my dorm room. We lived in different buildings, and residents needed keycards to enter, so someone must have let him in. I wasn't there. My roommate was out too, but I immediately texted back telling him to leave and explaining how inappropriate and frightening his behavior was. His response? Screenshots of my contact in his phone. On Apple devices, you can add extensive information to contacts, and he had filled in everything. He knew my home address, my dorm room number, my parents' and brothers' names, even my pets' names. This terrified me because I'm quite private. Instagram is my only social media, and I don't share much there. To this day, I have no idea how he discovered all that information about me. I blocked him on everything and reported him to the university. The school did absolutely nothing. I still see him on campus, and he still tries to approach me whenever he spots me. I always find a way to avoid him and run. It's worked so far. To the terrifying hinge match who might still be following me around to this day, please just leave me alone. In my mid-20s, I was bouncing around between jobs, unsure what direction my life should take. After ending a particularly toxic relationship, I was mainly focused on having fun rather than building a career. I'd been working at a hotel restaurant, but hated it when a friend told me about working reception at a massage parlor. In my city, these establishments operate completely legally. My friend said the money was decent, the hours worked well with university classes, and unlike hospitality, you could actually stand up for yourself if clients were rude. I found a place looking for receptionists, interviewed, and got the job. It wasn't particularly fascinating work, but it paid decently. I could smoke out back when cigarettes weren't ridiculously expensive, and during quiet periods, I could study. And just to be clear, receptionist wasn't code for anything else. I promise I'm not hiding anything. If I had been one of the service providers, it would probably make for an even more interesting story. We had regular clients, and they all developed certain reputations. This guy only books 30 minutes, but always extends his sessions. Or, this one will pay extra for conversation. Most of this information was innocuous, just details passed between staff. But some notes functioned more as warnings. This client will try to remove protection, or this one gets rough without asking first. Then there was Mason. Mason had money, lots of it, and would often book multiple service providers for extended sessions. He tipped well for relatively tame requests like specific lingerie or role-play scenarios. But there was a huge red flag attached to his name. The first time he came in, another receptionist warned me, no one has to do an introduction with him if they don't want to. Make sure to tell the girls it's Mason. When I announced the introduction, where all available providers would meet the client and introduce themselves, I was surprised when most of the workers immediately sat back down, saying, "It's Mason." Only 2 went to meet him. I asked what the issue was, and they explained. Mason likes cocaine. He likes providers who enjoy, or pretend to enjoy, it as well. And being a neurosurgeon, he gets access to unusual pharmaceuticals. His cocaine isn't cut with drain cleaner, but with surgical anesthetics. He also favors certain intimate activities that many workers refuse. He could become belligerent if providers declined after starting a booking, and his demeanor was deeply unsettling. When we'd check on him during sessions, he tried to make us, the receptionists, sit down with him. He'd grab our hands and stroke our arms. He had this intense stare, like a mannequin capable of eye contact. It's difficult to describe, but it was as though he was staring right through you while also not seeing you at all. His facial expressions seemed disconnected from his emotions. His mouth would smile, but his eyes remained fixed in that penetrating stare. It might have been the substances he was using, but regardless, it made your skin crawl. Despite this, a few experienced providers knew how to handle him, how to maximize their earnings while minimizing risks. It's possible to fake cocaine use, I learned, which is why we always gave workers the option to decline seeing him. He had a handful of bookings during my time there. We had strict rules never to let anyone do outcalls with him, bookings anywhere outside our establishment, and implemented several harm reduction strategies. Eventually, One of the workers who was comfortable seeing him left to travel, and no one else would see him, so he gradually stopped coming in. I moved on to reception at a different massage parlor that had opened closer to my home with better pay, and he showed up there too. He would visit various establishments until his reputation caught up with him. When he appeared at my new workplace, I warned all the providers about him, and none wanted to see him. He tried a couple more times before giving up. A year or so later, I had moved on to a daytime job, as I could no longer work nights. I was chatting with a friend from the massage parlor who said, "Oh my God, did you hear about Mason? He killed someone and got arrested." It was true. Mason had drugged a worker who had been sent to his apartment. The worker lay dead in his bed for 2 days. Officially, it was manslaughter, and he also pled guilty to supplying the substance that killed another worker. This happened because one despicable manager and the owners behind her prioritized profits over safety, sending workers to appointments with him without proper warnings and specifically sending inexperienced providers without keeping them in-house. Later, it came out that the medical board had known about Mason's addiction for years and had helped cover up some botched surgeries. It was horrifying to hear about, and my friend and I spent some time sharing stories about him before I mostly forgot about it. Recently, an old colleague reminded me of him, and I looked him up online. I discovered that Mason has been released from prison. I hope he's not practicing medicine anymore, but he could be anywhere now. To the predatory neurosurgeon who used his position to feed his addictions at the expense of vulnerable people's lives, your surgical precision couldn't hide your monstrous nature forever. I'm 23 now, but this happened when I was 21 with my 4-month-old son. He's mine, and he's turned 2 since then. I'm about 5'9", somewhat heavier than I'd like to be, and I've always struggled with social anxiety around new people. I had gone with my sister Morgan to her workplace, an upscale restaurant in River Point Mall, where she had a 6 p.m. shift. We'd spent the day in the city collecting donations for an animal rescue, and I was planning to relax, enjoy some good food, and browse Reddit while she worked. After settling in and eating, I decided I needed a cigarette. Bad habit, I know. I packed up my son in his stroller, told Morgan I was heading out to the parking area for a smoke as she passed through the dining room. The lot was about 70 meters from the restaurant, well lit, and since it was late evening, I could hang close to the entrance doors. That's when things turned unsettling. The security guard making his rounds, about my height, South Asian, decided to check on me. At first, I thought nothing of it. "How are you doing? Everything okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. Just waiting for my sister to finish her shift," I replied. Good. Your baby, very cute baby. I have 4 at home." He continued with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You got a husband?" "Yes, he's my baby's father," I answered, already feeling uneasy about his questions. "I can be husband," he declared without warning. "I look after baby for you. I look after you." My heart began racing. "No thanks. I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate that." No wife love baby. Wife will love you. You come home with me." I finished my cigarette while subtly moving the stroller further away from him with each passing second. Ha, no thanks. I'm going now." He followed me inside. I went all around the mostly closed shopping center, hoping to lose him in Barton's department store, but they'd shut for the night. The only place still open was my sister's restaurant, so I headed back there, though I didn't want him knowing where I was. Just as I was about to enter the restaurant, I spotted him coming up the escalator. He was still watching me. I quickly took the last 2 steps toward the hostess, who happened to be the owner's daughter, and quietly explained what was happening. The security guard stood in front of the restaurant, staring intently at me. The hostess took me to a semi-secluded booth and went to talk to her father. While she was gone, the security guard entered the dining area, searched for me, then came and sat in my booth, far too close to me and my child. "How old you? I want to ravish you, pretty women. You be mother to my babies." "We make cute babies," he said, reaching across the table with one hand while the other reached toward my son's stroller. I froze. I didn't care about the hand near me. I was watching the one near my baby. Nobody touches my baby. I was about to snap into full mama bear mode when the restaurant owner, a formidable man in his late 40s, well over 6 feet tall with a broad build, stepped in. "Is there a problem here?" His accent became more pronounced when agitated, something I would soon witness. "No problem, just talking to my lovely lady," the guard replied with that same unsettling grin. "This is a customer. Has she done something wrong?" the owner questioned. "No, never. She's my lady." "See, we're going to get married," he declared. The silent warning to play along etched into his face. Finding courage in the owner's presence, I spoke up. "Please just leave me alone. I just want to eat my dinner." "Oh, funny lady, see? We joke, but I don't know you," he said with forced laughter. "She says she wants you to leave now," the owner stated firmly. "She's just messing. She loves me. I'll be waiting for you, my pretty lady," the guard said, before finally leaving. The owner made sure I was okay and moved me to the employee break room, informing my sister of what happened. 2 hours later, when Morgan had finished her shift, we packed up and headed to the car. To my horror, the security guard appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "I take pretty lady and baby home now. Come on, pretty lady. We go home." Like an angel, the restaurant owner stepped out from behind the security guard's car. "She's going home with her sister. Pretty lady mine. She come home with me," the guard insisted. "Get in the car. I'll take care of this," the owner instructed us calmly. We got in the car and left. The next day, I learned from my sister that her boss had physically restrained the security guard when he tried to grab my arm as I was getting in the car. The owner had him fired and permanently banned from the shopping center. To the security guard who thought I was his pretty lady, "You weren't protecting anyone that night, and I'm grateful for those who protected me from you." One time, my girlfriend Amelia and I were in a tight spot, both homeless and trying desperately to find somewhere to park our aging RV. Because of its shabby condition and our 2 dogs, no campground wanted to rent us a space, so we ended up in the farthest corner of a Walmart lot just outside Bend, Oregon. One day, Amelia had errands to run, so she left me to watch over our home on wheels and pets. The day passed slowly. A bit of art, some repairs, and eventually boredom overtook me. Late afternoon drifted into evening when I noticed a couple of police cars parking close by. Anxiously expecting trouble, I waited, but nothing came of it, and eventually I dozed off. Waking later, I noticed the parking area had cleared significantly, except for one solitary van parked directly behind our RV. Amelia still wasn't back, and since she had our only phone, I needed to check the time inside Walmart. I carried my pepper spray instinctively, nervous but cautious. I checked the clock display in electronics, just shy of 6 p.m., and walked back toward the RV. Ahead of me, a thin, scraggly man with long blonde hair in a dark hoodie walked steadily in the same direction, It soon became clear he was heading straight toward that lone van. My stomach twisted with unease as I discreetly took out my pepper spray, gripping it tightly. As he reached the van, he didn't get inside. Instead, he stood eerily still, lingering by the driver's side, eyes shifting suspiciously. He suddenly glanced up, locking eyes with me. It felt as if he'd been waiting specifically for me, his stare piercing through the fading daylight. Heart racing, I abruptly changed course, veering toward the next shopping area across the street. When I looked back, he had vanished behind my RV, toward bushes and a dead-end fence. Panicked, I hurried into a nearby store and begged to use their phone, warning Amelia not to come back directly to the RV. With nowhere safe to go, I returned to Walmart's McDonald's, sipping coffee and anxiously watching the lot until Amelia finally returned. Together, we cautiously approached our vehicle, relieved to see the strange van was gone. Nothing was stolen, but the dogs were terrified, trembling in the shadows. Our RV was old and hardly valuable. Something told me the strange man had darker intentions than mere theft. After college, I briefly settled in Lyon, France, working exhausting shifts in a posh hotel kitchen. 12-hour days filled with impossible demands from entitled guests. My daily commute was brutal. A half-hour drive, another 30 minutes on the metro, then a dreary walk through dimly lit streets. One especially draining evening, hair matted from kitchen steam and mind numbed by fake smiles, I boarded the crowded metro. Standing near the door that wouldn't reopen at future stops, I leaned back, seeking rest. Suddenly, a man in an electric wheelchair rolled onto the train, his bag sticking out slightly. Seeing the doors about to close on them, I quickly pushed them forward, helping him avoid a mishap. He smiled, started speaking French, but noticing my confusion, switched abruptly to broken English. Politeness trapped me in conversation, his questions increasingly personal. Where you live? Where you from? Uncomfortable, I answered vaguely. Then he demanded a kiss. Embarrassed and alarmed, I firmly declined, putting my headphones back in. He buzzed an alarm on his chair loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Flustered, I removed my headphones again as he persisted aggressively. Come with me, be my girlfriend. I refused repeatedly. Finally, my stop arrived. Hastily exiting, I was horrified as he followed me off the metro. I'm coming home with you, he stated firmly, rolling determinedly after me. Panicking, I bolted up the stairs, embarrassed but desperate to evade him. Relief flooded me at street level until a familiar buzzing noise echoed from behind. He was racing toward me, eyes filled with frightening determination. Reaching my car, fingers trembling, I fumbled the keys. By the time I glanced back, he'd parked his chair directly behind my vehicle, staring me down menacingly. We remained in a silent standoff until he slowly rolled away, eyes narrowed hatefully. The next morning, to my horror, he was waiting at my regular metro stop, a twisted smile on his face, anticipating my arrival. Terrified, I turned away, called my boss, and took my car into the city, wasting money I couldn't spare on parking fees. Afterward, I changed my routine completely, using distant, sketchier stations to avoid him, haunted by that electric buzz long afterward. When I was a kid, my family lived in a rough part of Baltimore. I was mute, born with damaged vocal cords, making my mum particularly protective, knowing I couldn't scream if danger approached. At 8 years old, I foolishly convinced her to let me walk home alone from school, eager for independence despite the risks. One ordinary afternoon, as I walked home, lost in daydreams. Strong arms suddenly grabbed me from behind, dragging me roughly toward a dark alley. Paralyzed with terror, my senses were overwhelmed by his foul odor, like sweaty gym clothes rotting in a forgotten locker. His breathing rasped hotly against my neck, each exhale heavy, frantic. I struggled wildly, kicking back, desperate to reach the whistle around my neck, but my arms were pinned tight. Helplessness engulfed me. He squeezed tighter until stars danced before my eyes, consciousness slipping. I thought, terrifyingly, this was the end. Suddenly, distant yelling echoed from the sidewalk. Two strangers, alarmed by the commotion, ran toward us, shouting furiously. The grip loosened abruptly, dropping me onto the cold pavement. Footsteps pounded past as the attacker fled deeper into the alley. Shaking violently, I didn't look at the rescuers, didn't pause to thank them. Instinct drove me to bolt home, where I collapsed inside, sobbing uncontrollably. Later, police came, questioning gently, though they clearly saw such incidents as routine. They never found him. After that day, I never walked home alone again. My brother rearranged his sports schedule to accompany me, and eventually, my mother moved us far away to Washington State. Years later, visiting my grandparents still stirs up painful memories, reminding me how easily that alley could have become my final resting place. To the two strangers who chased away that monster, whoever you were, I owe you my life. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's stories and want more scary stories like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Also, if you've got your own scary experiences, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. I'll catch you all in the next video.